On the ACT, critical reading consists of 4 passages. They're always going to be in the exact same order: prose fiction, social science, humanities, and natural science. Always in that order, always in the exact same number, always with the exact same number of questions. 10 questions per passage. You have about 8 minutes, 45 seconds per passage to read the passage and answer all of the questions. The reason why I start with that is because I want to kind of scare you a little bit into thinking about these passages in a different light, because you don't have a whole lot of time. And one of the most unfortunate things about these tests is that they really seem to punish careful, methodical, slow readers, which isn't really fair. So what can you do to kind of get back, so to speak, at the structure of the test and deal with the timing a little bit better? The first thing is knowing how to move through this in the most effective way. First and foremost, one of the big questions I get asked: read the questions first, read the passage first. The answer to that is always read the passage first. There are way too many questions. Your brain has this thing called working memory. You can hold about 4 to 7 pieces of information in your working memory at any given time. That's why phone numbers, they're 7 digits long, and they're usually clumped into groups of 3 or 4. Like you think of area code, like maybe a number is like 802-864-6400, 3 by 3 by 4. It's because we can only hold so much information in our brains and do much with it in the first place. You have 10 questions per passage. You have 4 passages. You just have way too much information to be able to answer that by just going through the questions, trying to remember the questions, look at the passage, then go from there. So what you have to do is this. You read the passage first, looking for the main ideas of each paragraphs, and we're going to talk about where you look for that. The most important parts of the passages are first paragraph, last paragraph, first sentence of each paragraph, last sentence of each paragraph. I have had quite a number of students who are challenged in terms of their speed in getting through these passages, work quite successfully with this by just focusing and just reading, I should say, the first paragraph, then the first sentence of each body paragraph, and then the last paragraph, and then going straight to the questions. The reason for this is this. If you read the passage first and then look at the questions, you're going to have to come back to the passage. You will. But you're going to come back to the place in the passage where the information you need is. Meanwhile, if you go ahead and look at the questions first, after the first question, you're going to end up reading that passage pretty much the whole way through anyway. And for each question, you're probably going to have to read a good chunk of the passage. And then for some of them, you may end up reading the passage for each of the 4 answer choices. So you're going to end up reading the passage anyway. You might as well start off by reading it in a quick, effective manner to at least know where things are, so that when you do have to come back, you come back just to what you need and nothing else. So the correct approach is you're going to read the passage first, and you're going to pay attention to the most important elements of the passage. The prose fiction is a little bit different. So let me talk about the prose fiction first and what the difference with that, and then we'll talk about the main approach for the nonfiction. So you're still going to read the passage first. That much remains the same. But prose fiction comes from a novel or a short story. What you need to read for that one is you need to read for characters. That's what they're testing you on in the prose fiction. Who are the characters? What are their attitudes about each other? What are their relationships to each other? And how do you know this stuff? So when you read the prose fiction, you want to read a little more quickly. You just want to kind of start going through it, really just looking for who's here. Who are they talking about? What are their attitudes, relations? Is this person kind of nice? Is he quiet? Is he a jerk? Is she a jerk? Is she a terrible person? Is she wonderful? Do they have a relationship where they dislike each other? Do they have a relationship where they love each other? What are those attitudes, characteristics, and relationships? Move through quickly, ideally circling or underlining or otherwise making a mark to help you remember where major characters are either introduced or something significant about their relationship is revealed. Once you've read the passage, you go into the questions. Here's how you answer the questions. What you want to go ahead and do is you want to read the question first and then answer it in your head. Why do you do that? You do that for this reason. 3 out of those 4 answer choices are designed to mess with your head, or I should at least say 2 of them usually are. One of them is going to be correct, one of them is going to usually be pretty lousy, and you'll be able to tell right off the bat that it's incorrect. 2 of them will probably look pretty good. Where are they putting the error that makes it incorrect? They're usually putting it at the end of that question. So what you do is you want to answer the question in your head first. The reason why is because then you know what it is that you are looking for instead of being suggested to. Because when you're suggested to under stress, you're just going to want to pick something and move right on to the next question. If you know what you're looking for, you're not going to be satisfied until you get the nearest thing that matches your own answer selection. So we talked a little bit about the prose fiction here. This is from a real guy, real book named Salman Rushdie. He came to speak at UVM last year. And basically he's talking about his own childhood, or at least this character is talking about his childhood growing up in Mumbai and how the city just seemed to become so different from what it was traditionally around the time of his birth, and what he learns talking to his family members about themselves and about Mumbai in reflection. Let's go ahead and take a look at the questions now. Question 1. The passage as a whole can primarily be characterized as the narrator's. If you're being asked about the passage as a whole, you want to take a look at the first and last paragraphs. Those are generally going to summarize what the whole gist of the thing was. So the first paragraph, when you grow up, as I did, in a great city during what just happens to be its golden age, you will think of it as eternal. And he talks all about this, how Mumbai was designed in Art Deco and how beautiful it is. Last paragraph, when I said this to my father, he showed me photos, still lives of storefronts and piers, and told me I was too young to understand. See where people lived and worked and shopped, he clarified with a rare flash of irritation, and it all becomes plain what they were like. For all his digging, Vivi Merchant was content with surfaces of his world. I, his photographer's son, set out to prove him wrong, to show that a camera can see beyond the surface, beyond the trappings of the actual, and penetrate to the flesh of the heart. Well, this is his story of reflecting on Mumbai as he was growing up, and as an adult, explaining how the images of that period have come to affect him. An explanation of the relationship the narrator and his parents had with the city of Bombay. Maybe. Description of important buildings and locations in Bombay. Not quite, right? Because they did talk about that in passing, but that wasn't really the focus. It's about what that meant to the narrator and the narrator's family. Argument for Bombay's prominence in the world of architecture. Again, that's just something they kind of mention in passing. It's not the core focus from the beginning and end paragraphs. Concerns about the emotional environment in which the narrator was raised. We're not really talking about the emotional environment of the narrator in the sense of, did he have a stable home? Was he loved by his parents? This is really about the city and the city developing around him as he's growing up. So A would be correct. Let's take a look at one more of these. Let's take a look at question 9. The reason why I point out 9 is because 9 is a great question if you're running out of time. If you don't have time to answer all these questions, look for the ones that give you line references. Because if you have a line reference, the majority of time, all you're going to have to read is going to be the sentence before the line reference, and then the sentence after it to be able to answer the question. So let's take a look at line 38. Bombay was my rival. It was on account of their romance with the city that they drew up the weekly rota, that is, list of shared parental responsibilities. When my mother wasn't with me, when I was riding on my father's shoulders or staring with him at the fish in the Tapwarawala Aquarium, she was out there with her, with Bombay. There we go. Drew up. Which of those words could you put back into that sentence and have that sentence still make sense?
B.
B. Prepared. That's correct. So that's how you do those. You go ahead, you go back, you see what the phrase is, you plug in the answer choices, whichever answer choice makes sense, that's it. Those are called vocabulary and context questions. There are always going to be at least 3 or 4 of them on the test, so it's good to be comfortable with those because they can be a nice little source of quick points for you. So let's go ahead and move on to the nonfiction passages, because the nonfiction passages, remember when I said first paragraph, last paragraph, first sentence, last sentence? These are the ones where really that technique shines, and you can really push through much more quickly. So you have 3 nonfiction passages. I've just printed out one of them for today, but otherwise you would have another 3, and they would be social sciences, humanities, and natural science. What helps in terms of getting through in time is knowing what these people are talking about. What are nonfiction passages? They're experts. They are experts doing one of two things, because experts only do two things. They either explain something to you, or they argue with other experts. And that's all the experts are going to do in these passages. There's two levels. One level is they're just trying to explain some idea to you. The other level is they're trying to argue with other experts by saying, some people say we should do this, but they're wrong. Other times they'll say, people in history had this opinion, but here's how we discovered they were wrong. So what you want to do is you want to figure out pretty quickly, is this just trying to explain something to me, some kind of phenomenon? Because if it is, then you know what the author's main idea is, no matter what the topic. If the topic is about, the extinction of the buffalo, and the author's just trying to explain it to you, it's just going to be, this is something that happened in the life of the buffalo. The main idea is just explaining how they came to be nearly extinct, or how conservation efforts are bringing them back. Alternatively, if it's an argument essay, you automatically know, if they're saying, oh, here's the misguided nature of buffalo restoration, you know that all the evidence is being used to oppose buffalo restoration, or what have you. So let's go ahead and check this here. What's going on in this passage? So is this somewhere where the author's trying to explain something to us, or argue with another expert? This is the first kind. The author's just trying to explain to us something about, the geography or geology, I should say, of the deep sea bottom is all it really is. So the author is explaining to us what's going on at the very bottom of the sea. If you keep that sort of core idea in here, you'll find a lot of the questions will be pretty manageable. So with that in mind, what's the organization here? Well, we start off, we got this ship, it's floating in the water. That first paragraph is actually fairly obnoxious in this passage. It's the last paragraph that really gives us the main idea. But just so you know, sometimes they do that, but we get it. There's a boat, it's sailing out somewhere. It's already sailed over some really deep water. The rest of the passage is going to be explaining to us now what's going on at the bottom of the ocean. So second paragraph, only 1,000 miles offshore, has already sailed to the deepest waters. Then these crude soundings forming the basis of the first map of the Atlantic Basin, published in 1854, identified a prominent rise halfway between Europe and America. So what's going on? First paragraph, this is one where we can kind of ignore it. Second paragraph tells us we're talking about the bottom of the ocean and gives us some chronology and some details. Back in 1854, they found this great big rise in the middle of the ocean. Chances are, if we're talking about the great big rise or 1854, that is where we're going to want to look. Next paragraph. Today, for many years, no one could explain why the basin of the Atlantic, unlike a bowl, deepened at its edges and shoaled in the center. So it's like a flipped over bowl, I guess. It was some of the youngest, freshest rock on Earth, and it was torn not from a piece of the continent sunk beneath the waves, but from the very foundation of the sea. So surprisingly, the water at the very deepest bottom is actually some of the newest rock. We go on to the next paragraph. Today, highly sophisticated sound waves bring the hazy image of those early soundings into sharp focus, revealing one of the largest and most salient geographic features on the planet lies on the floor of the ocean. Peaks as high as Mount St. Helens sit in a watery world of blackness more than a mile below the surface, beyond the reach of light, beyond the sight of sailors. A great valley eclipsing any comparable feature on dry land runs through these mountains. So you see these are all huge. And then last sentence of that second to last paragraph. Scientists visiting the Rift Valley for the first time named the volcanic hills in this otherworldly setting after distant lifeless planets. Last paragraph now. Yet what had seemed so foreign to scientists is an integral part of the Earth's very being, for at the ridge is our own planet, or is where our own planet gives birth. The floor of the Rift Valley is torn from the gashes, has sprung the sea floor underlying all the Atlantic. Finally, in one sentence, we have the main idea of what this is all about. This is about how plate tectonics is causing the creation of new seafloor, and this is just explaining how we came to discover that process and what we now know about that process. You see why I say first paragraph, last paragraph. First paragraph usually does give it. Sometimes you got to wait to the last one, but you now know pretty much where everything is discussed in this passage, and we can come back to it to answer the questions. So question 11. The author's attitude towards the main subject of the passage can best be described as the author is attempting to explain to us a natural phenomenon, or the history otherwise of discovery of what's going on the seafloor. Is this the kind of thing somebody gets angry about? Nah, not usually. So the author is going to be either A, fairly neutral, or fairly positive. So we're looking for a relatively neutral or positive answer. Awe and fascination. Maybe. The guy seems pretty fascinated by this stuff. Then we've got disbelief and cynicism. There's no cynicism. This person is not distrustful or sarcastic, so that's out. Amusement and nostalgia. Doesn't seem very amused, like he's not like laughing or anything, or crazy positive. And then boredom and indifference. Not seeing any sort of like, the seafloor, who cares? That's what indifference would be. So by process elimination, after going through those, A, awe and fascination is the one that matches our prediction, and that makes sense in the context of the other choices. Let's go ahead and try 1-2 more of these. The main purpose of the information in lines 71 through 76 is to. So 71, 76, we go back, we see that is here. Here in the bleak and forbidding place where the water is almost freezing, subterranean fires have lifted mounds of fresh lava onto the seafloor. Scientists visiting the Rift Valley for the first time. So what is that there? That is a description of a dark, not very nice place. So the effect of that is to help give the reader a sense of how different this world is at the bottom of the sea, that kind of a thing. Describe in detail scientists' expectations. We don't have anything about the scientists' expectations there, so that's out. Characterize the Rift Valley as an alien, seemingly barren place. That could work. Provide statistics about several geographic properties of the Rift Valley. It doesn't do that right there, and that's an important thing to note. You notice how right before those quoted lines, it gives statistics? That's there to trap you. When they say specific lines, they want specific lines. When they say a specific paragraph, they mean a specific paragraph. So if you see something elsewhere that answers the question, that's not it. You have to focus on what they're asking you to focus on. Then after that, list the names the scientists gave the volcanic hills in the Rift Valley. It doesn't list them. It just says that they gave them these names, but doesn't actually tell us what they are. So in that case, B would be the best answer choice. But really briefly, I just want to talk about what the topic areas are for the other two that aren't here. Social science usually talks about something having to do with people discovering things or something in society changing. Humanities is about art, architecture, literature, poetry, music, painting. It's about the creative world. And the tricky thing about humanities is this. Very often it is about an artist reflecting on their own experience with art. So it can be very tricky to separate out what an artist thought when they were young, what they thought in between when they were young and when they're writing this, and what they think when they write this. So be very careful with humanities to pay attention to where in the artist's life they're talking about their opinions. Because they love to go ahead and say, oh, the author thinks which of the following about sculpture, and they'll take an opinion that the author had when they were a kid and put that there, and that won't be correct. They'll be looking for the updated opinion. Natural science, very straightforward. Natural science is about science as you understand it. Geology, astronomy, biology, zoology, environmental sciences. Those are the most common types of areas that they're taking from the natural science. So the good news is that natural science is usually one of the easiest sections for my students because here in Vermont, we do a ton of science writing and particularly environmental and ecological science reading and writing, whether it's farm-oriented or Champlain watershed or forestry. We do a lot more of that kind of reading. So natural science, compared to say like New York City, where they're not going to read so much about forests or whatnot. So those sections tend to go pretty well for students here.